Parenting a struggling teen can be confusing. It's lonely, and it often feels hopeless. Whether you are parenting a depressed teen, a defiant teen, an ADHD teen, or any other struggling teen, you are not alone. You are not a bad parent. It's time to find what works. It's time for Hope for Parents with Struggling Teens. And this is going to be a kind of a heavy-hitting episode tonight, and so kind of let's all just kind of get in the mindset of participating and turning it on. And I love that you're here. Thank you for bringing up these issues. These are really difficult issues. They are very important issues. I hope a lot more people sign on tonight to be a part of this. A 17-year-old is too young but too old to eat. I would even say unless it's a mediated forum with like a therapist, a teacher, an adult who's, regulating the conversation, that's not a conversation that older kids should be having with younger kids.
Absolutely.
And so just be careful of that, because I know that it's going on. There's a lot of things that we're trying to figure out right now with the new climate, not just from this past year, but the years of just everybody has access to everybody. Issues are being renamed. It's not just with sex and gender topics, it's with mental health topics as a whole. Younger people are taking bits and pieces and speaking and redefining a lot of things.
Absolutely.
And everybody is trying to make sense of it right now. I want you guys, just the one thing that they brought up and that I'm going to repeat because I think it's this important, is this isn't it's totally a necessary conversation. But if it's younger people with older people, it should be mediated, it should be controlled, and it should be about healing or processing or figuring out. Now, you're not going to be able to control everything. I'm not saying go stalk your kids or do anything. I just want to plant that seed in terms of what's appropriate. And in sexual conversations cannot and should not happen between older kids and younger kids. The other things that I wrote down is I'm going to address cutting. I'm going to address just how to talk to your kids about sexuality, gender topics that are coming out that are, you are going to have these conversations. This is a big part of what's going on social media, in the news, in the schools, everywhere. And people have, as you guys know, it is huge politics, it is huge debate. You have conservatives, you have people who disagree and agree, and we're not going to get into that tonight. Okay? But I do want to talk to you about how to handle these issues with your child in a way. What's our number one goal? What do we want to maintain with our children? Relationship. Now, that's really hard when we feel so strongly about these issues, when it goes against your faith possibly, or it goes against what you believe, or maybe it doesn't go against it and you feel and want something over here or over there. And this is becoming such a difficult, gnarly topic for so many people. We need to figure out how to navigate through this, no matter what you believe in, what you want, life you want your child to have, while maintaining a healthy relationship. And then what do we hope to have over our kids in the long run? Influence. So as hard-hitting, as difficult as some of these situations might be, as scary as it is for all of us, our goal is to figure out how to maintain our healthy relationship with our children and be influential to our children. No matter what you believe, okay? No matter what side of things you're on. And so what's scary is I can't imagine what you guys have been through. You found out your child's cutting, you read these sexual text messages, and you're seeing language that is in social media, and it's confusing, and it clearly goes against the faith that you're raising your family in, and it is hard, and some people don't agree with you and some people do, and then you start to wonder, yeah, but my other two kids turned out this way, and now why is this child struggling with this? And I can't imagine what you guys are going through, and I'm just going to have you breathe through it and take a step back. And anytime you find yourself in these scary crises, whether it is a whole bunch of stuff that's going on with everybody in the world, or it's something that just your family or your child's going through, stop. Just stop and recognize that you're in the middle of a crisis. Okay? And when we're in a crisis, we first want to ask ourselves, right, what are the immediate dangers? Okay? And when I say immediate danger, is somebody suicidal? Is somebody at risk of being taken advantage of? Is there something that is physically going on, right? So when we're in the middle of a crisis, we want to kind of do an assessment real quick. As silly as that might sound, right, especially if it's a crisis of grades or Fs, right? Because parents find themselves in all kinds of crises. My kid's going to be kicked out of school. My kid's having identity issues. My kid is completely defiant and a criminal. My child's really, really, really depressed and confused and is cutting, right? These are all crises. So the moment you find yourself in a crisis as a parent, you're going to want to do a lot of things. Now, when you do and say a lot of things, does that usually go well for you? As hard as it's going to be for you guys, when you find yourself in the middle of a crisis, and crises that are affecting your morals and your values and your faith and the way you're trying to raise your child, they seem like huge. They seem so gigantic. And I'm telling you, do nothing at first. Like, just stop everything. Okay? And then I want you to remind yourself what your goal really is with your children. You're right. So as we navigate through this crisis, if I can ask myself, okay, or remind myself, I want to respond and navigate through this in a way that is protective of my relationship. Okay? Protective of my relationship, which is hard, right? Because now you'll notice I'm not saying pleasing in the moment to my child. When I say protective of the relationship, I want you guys thinking of the relationship when your children are how old? 30. I want you thinking, all right, I'm protecting this relationship so that because we're preparing for a relationship and success and an awesome launching of my child when they're 30. Okay? Not saying they have to live in your house till they're 30. And so just asking yourself and reminding yourself of that might slow you down. Oh, I want to have some influence over my child. Now, most of your children have been preached at, taught, and you have really ingrained all of your morals, your faith, your values, your rules. They know pretty much everything you think, right? And they may or may not agree with you. So when we're in the middle of a crisis, most of the time, your gut instinct to talk, right? Remind them of the morals and values is not going to end up being very influential. When you're in the middle of a crisis, even if it's your child's fault, what's the most influential thing you can do in that moment of crisis? Listen. The most influential thing you can do in the middle of a crisis, no matter how angry you are, no matter how scared you are, no matter how much this crisis is going against everything you have done in your life, the most influential thing you can do is stop and listen. Gather information even if you think you have all the information. Wait to respond. Now, I'm not saying there's not going to be a time to set boundaries. I'm not saying there's not going to be a time to express yourself. But right when that crisis happens, right, whether it's they're telling you that they've been cutting, or they're telling you that they are leaving college, or whatever this is, their whole life has been shattered for some reason, listen. Become what I call obliviously curious. Does anybody remember me using that term in the past? So,
I love it.
When we're obliviously curious, we set aside all of our assumptions. We set aside the things that we know, and we become curious with that kind of naive and oblivious attitude or demeanor. You've got to tell yourself, I know nothing. Even though I know everything, I know nothing, and I'm going to even gather information about the stuff that I know. And so when you can stop yourself because you want to protect the relationship, and you're reminding yourself, first and foremost, I want to protect this relationship. When you can remind yourself that the goal is to be influential in the long run, then what helps with all of that is taking on the attitude and the demeanor of being obliviously curious. Okay? What's that like to hear for some of you? Yeah, Nicole?
I think it makes sense because it gives you because I think in the moment, if you're really frustrated, you could end up sounding judgmental and therefore cause your child to just shut down and not want to talk. Mm-hmm. So if you're just listening, and asking, questions, if you want to ask questions, it just takes away some of that judgment.
Right. It's a really important therapist skill, right? When we want to know more about our clients, we've got to wipe all our assumptions away. And you'd be surprised when you can stop assuming and you just ask these obliviously curious questions. And what I have in mind right now is you said that you saw in some text messages all these words like non-binary and these gender and sexual terms that seem to be new and seem to be influenced by social media. And I think a lot of parents' instinct would be to, try and set the record straight. Well, in that moment, the most influential thing you can do is, I don't understand all this stuff. Right? Even if you think you do, help me understand. What are you guys talking about here? What the heck is going on? I don't get it. Right? And I know your mind's going to say, no, I get it. I know what they're doing. And I'm going to set the record straight. No. I want you to just take a breath, step back. Hey, I just read a lot of concerning things that, but I don't understand. Can you help me understand these text messages? What's going on here? Now, I know some of you are going, yeah, but my child doesn't know that we're reading their text messages. That's a whole nother conversation, okay? Oh, no, we're assuming, right, in this example, right, that you can talk about it. Hey, you know what? I read this. Help me understand what this means and what you meant by that. And when you were saying this to your friend, what was going on? And again, your brain's going to tell you, what was going on, and it's time to pounce. Don't pounce. Wait. You guys, I get it. Look, most of you are really, really good pouncers. I get it. But don't pounce. Please don't pounce, because in the middle of the crisis, if you pounce, you run the risk of a few things. Number one, missing something. You run the risk of missing something that was really important. Number two, you run the risk of pushing them further into the corner you're hoping they won't go into. I can't tell you how many times with some of the teens I work with, I ask questions that you would think they were obvious questions and almost silly for me to ask, but then I get answers that blow my mind. And I figure out they didn't understand things, or their circle of friends are using terms incorrectly, and the teens want to know. I go, oh man, that's not, and I don't tell them, hey, I don't agree with you, hey, you're wrong. It's, oh wow, I've always thought of that word differently. I didn't know that's what it is. Is that what it means now? Right? You see, obliviously curious. So when you pounce, you run the risk of pushing them into that corner. You run the risk of damaging the relationship. You run the risk of missing things. You run the risk of proving them right about you. See, they've got this story about in their head about how it's going to go when they have this difficult conversation. And when you pounce, that's what often they're expecting. And when you don't pounce, you build the relationship in that moment. You become safer. You have a lot of time to set new boundaries if you need to set new boundaries. You're going to have all the time in the world to find that perfect moment to teach them the lesson that you're hoping that they might learn. You're going to have ample opportunity to make sure they know that they did something wrong, or to make sure that they know what your side of things are, right? But in that crisis moment, are they ready to hear you usually? I mean, ask yourself when you're in crisis, or you're angry, or you're sad, or you're confused, or you're scared, is that a really good time to learn something or to be in a debate, right? Are you really accepting of information coming your way? No. You want everything to come out first. And so remember that you want to help your child, you want to help position your child in a way that they're more likely to be influenced by you. So one thing you can do is just don't pounce in a crisis. Okay. You protect the relationship.
Okay.
You remind yourself, I want influence over my child. I don't need to change it now. But I want to make sure everybody understands the crisis mentality that I want you to have. Does everybody get it? Does it seem reasonable? So then we get to the, okay, what do? I've got to set the boundaries, right? Look, I know you want to set the boundaries there and now. It's okay to wait. It's okay that you did it. I'm not saying you guys did anything wrong if you pounced and set the boundaries. I get it, you were scared. But I want you to consider, before you set boundaries in the moment, is this a healthy, good moment for me to set them? And it might be. I don't know every situation. But sometimes everybody needs to be able to process and think through things. I never recommend that you set boundaries during the crisis. Okay? I never recommend that you set boundaries during the crisis. I think that it's healthier to set boundaries when everybody's cool, calm, and collected. You're outside of the situation. You can maybe have a good, healthy conversation about it. And I'm not saying like let them have half say on the boundaries, but they might have something that you want to listen to, right? And so when we set boundaries in crisis, the problem with a healthy boundary is you've got to follow through, and a lot of the boundaries you set when you're in crisis are difficult to follow through with, or you find yourself in conundrums because you didn't think through things. And remember that all healthy boundaries are protective of you. This is going to seem really weird to you guys who are brand new tonight. Boundaries are not about changing your child. Healthy boundaries are about protecting you, your home, your relationship, your happiness, while raising this child who's having a difficult time. Okay? And so it becomes difficult, again, to set boundaries when all the emotions are raging. Try not to get into a conversation about who's influencing who. The conversation about friendship should be, hey, I'm worried about what's going on. Okay, it should be a conversation with your child. I'm going to let you guys in on a secret that you may know, but it's going to disappoint every one of you. Okay, if your children are determined to have a relationship or a friendship with somebody, they are going to have it. None of you are very powerful, sorry. Okay, now, in this case, it kind of sounds like their child was almost willing to go along with it, was compliant in it, and maybe seeing that this relationship wasn't healthy. So I think it might actually work out, okay? But when you come out the gate, hey, you're not hanging out with that person, that's much different than setting boundaries. Hey, I'm worried about what's going on when you guys hang out. Here's the parameters that you guys can have a relationship in our home, or whatever it might be. Consider saying something like that before you put a kibosh or think you're putting a kibosh to relationships. The other piece that I want you, and I'm not going to tell you to stop or not stop relationships for your children, because then I'm taking on too much liability. I just want you to think about a few things. The other thing I want you to think, so I want you to think about the fact that you probably can't stop it. Number two, there's a better way to be in relationship and maybe help set boundaries, at least in the beginning, than just saying, you're done, okay? And then the other thing you've got to think about is you don't know all the facts usually. And I'm going to kind of throw myself under the bus. I have some friends today who are the most successful friends that I have, and they are what you would have considered, all of us were probably what you would consider bad influences on each other. We got into trouble together, lots of trouble together. And so, but I look back and you see, while there were some negative influences going on, there was also some things being built and friendships and things we were wrestling with that some of which led me to talking to you today. There were some self-esteem things that some of these friends gave me that nobody else was going to be able to give me. And so my point being, we don't always know who should be in somebody's life in the long run. Now, again, sometimes you guys are like totally right? That's why I'm not saying whether you should or you shouldn't. I just want you considering that we don't always have the facts and we can't always tell the future about the role that people will play in our children's lives or in our lives. Okay. And I think that's a really important thing to consider before you address the issue of my child has some friends who are really, really bad influences. Make sense? Okay. Now, I want to get to, before it gets too late, I want to get to some of the other issues that you guys brought up, and we're not going to be able to finish. This isn't going to feel complete tonight, but they brought up some amazing issues. One is cutting, and I want to talk real quickly about that so that everybody understands cutting is not suicidal tendencies. Sometimes it goes hand in hand, sometimes it doesn't. Now, some therapists would not agree with what I'm about to say next. We are now seeing cutting describes something more than it ever did when I was first going to school. Okay? When I was first going in a psych major and going to school, cutting wasn't something that people talked about very often. It was just beginning to be talked about. And so there's this thing about cutting. There are people who self-harm, whether it be cutting, burning, doing things to an extent that you can't believe that they can do this to themselves. In other words, the cuts and the burns are, when you see what they do, you're going, oh my gosh, that would be so painful. And they didn't get it from somebody else. They were doing it on their own. And there were enough people doing it that the mental health profession had to start taking a look at it. And so what I think now we have, cutting is a social media phenomenon. It's something that everybody's talking about. It's something that it'd be hard to find somebody who hasn't heard about cutting. And now we have kind of a wide range of cutters. And I'll explain what I mean in a second. But understand that a long time ago, for the most part, cutters were ashamed of it. They didn't share it. It wasn't something that people really knew about. It was shocking once you found out about it. And at least when I would come across it, it was unbelievable the amount of hurt that people would do to themselves. And the reason they hurt themselves was because they were trying to make an emotional pain go away. And kind of like drugs and alcohol, it was giving them a break from the deep emotional pain that they were feeling on the inside. And then it wouldn't work, and they'd have to do it more. And so cutting always looked like this, a lot like addiction. And it was, when you would work with somebody who cut, it felt like you were working with an addict. They really wanted to stop. It wasn't even doing what it did before, but they couldn't stop, and they would kind of up the ante. Okay? Now, we still have some of those clients, but we also have some clients who are all the way on the end of they're not really cutting, they're making marks, and they're making sure that people see the marks or hear about the marks. They do the I'm hiding it but showing it off thing, right? So that's the two ends of the spectrum with cutting. And then you have everything in between. You have some people who are and learn to, and then they like it, and then they be right. So you can imagine how I could go on for hours about the different nuances and the varying types of cutting that I've seen. Or we say cutting, but it's really self-harm. I think it's cutting now because that has become the kind of dominant way that people self-harm. Now, I say all that, and then I tell parents, don't try to figure out where they are on the spectrum of it. Just treat it as though it's very important. Don't try to figure out if it is a cry for attention, or if they're showing it off, or if they're just making a mark, or they're actually hurting themselves and practicing self-harm to address emotional pain on the inside. And that's for a couple reasons. Number one, you're not qualified. Number two, it's not going to go well. Number three, you could cause more damage than good calling them out. Okay, does everybody understand why I'm kind of talking about this and where I'm going with it? Okay. So I could talk about cutting a lot more, and I think we should in the future, but I wanted to address it at least a little bit tonight. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts on that? Calling them out on cutting, I mean calling them out on whether or not they are just doing it for attention. So I've had parents, for instance, who saw that it was, they find out that their child's cutting, and then they finally check the cut, and it's like a little mark, a little red mark that's going to go away tomorrow. And they call their child out on that. That's what I'm talking about. I'm saying absolutely address that they're cutting. Don't call them out on whether or not they're truly cutting or self-harming or just going with the trend, because it is. It sounds so wild to say this, but it is a trendy thing. There are circles who are showing it off. A lot of times they don't remember, or they do remember. And look, don't become investigators. What do I want you guys to do instead? How do we ask questions? With what mindset? Being obliviously curious. And I know it's splitting hairs, but I'm telling you, when you have that mindset, it becomes, when you're asking questions, it doesn't feel like an interrogation. It just feels like you're curious. And that's really important. Okay? And it sounds like you might have pulled that off. So the next, and I could talk an entire session about cutting, and maybe one day we will. The next issue they brought up is the everything going on with sexuality and gender, what we call it and everything, right? Social media, everybody's on it, different sides, and it's literally one of the most hot topics right now. You guys, I'm only going to give you one recommendation, and I've already given it. Be obliviously curious, don't debate right now. Be obliviously curious and don't debate. Trust that whatever you've taught and modeled down the road, if you're an influence, if you're a safe parent, is going to influence them in the long run. Right now is not the time to enter into a debate. Now, if you're in a conversation that's healthy and they're asking you what you think or what question, if they may have questions, then I'm going to say congratulations, you're now a safe parent, and you know that you're a safe parent, and respond. But don't come in hot and heavy trying to have that debate, and don't let them bait you. Okay? If your kids are carrying around resentments, they might use some of these topics to kind of get you to say something so that they can do what to you? Cancel you, right? Some of you guys are not in a good relationship right now with your kids, and they're going to look for any reason to get you to say something that they can tell themselves is horrible so that they can cancel you in their minds. And we don't want that. Know when it's a good time to have a conversation, when it's time just to stay obliviously curious. Okay. Any thoughts or questions on that one? Okay. Now, I love that you got her therapy and you were wondering, is this doing anything? Should I be more involved? And, I run into this all the time. Parents want to know what the heck is going on in therapy. Now, a lot of times we do things a little bit differently here because we are more focused on doing family work a lot of times when we see a teen. And then the individual work kind of gets folded into that, but not always. Sometimes we just see the teen individually. Now, you're not a safe therapist if you're going to report to the parents. Just remember that. And if you're worried about things getting done or progressing in therapy, I'm going to tell you this. Most likely what you want getting done is not happening on your timeline, and it might not happen at all. But if your child is taking the time to go to therapy and following through, it's probably healthy. It's probably a good thing in the long run. And let's say they don't resolve their issues this go around of therapy, but they had a pleasant experience. Well, then I don't care if they get nothing done now. If they just had a stint of therapy that makes them more likely to go back in the future, I say it's a win. And so remember, I'm always thinking long term, not the short term here and now. And so don't be so worried. Man, it is a win if you get your child into therapy and they're participating. Period. It's a win. And if you want to address something with them, where do you think you should do that? In family therapy, people.
In therapy.
If you want to bring up difficult things in a healthy way and you need help doing so, don't play games with their therapy. Get a session of family therapy going and address it. A lot of times I'll have parents ask me stuff. I say, well, let me see if your kid wants you to come into therapy, and you can ask them yourself, or I tell you to go ask them. Because my job is to stay a safe help for the whole family, especially the client. Does that make sense, you guys? Okay. The other issue that I wrote down is this idea of body dysmorphia. This is really important. Body dysmorphia, in essence, is I don't see my body for what it actually is. Okay? It's dysmorphic. In other words, what I see isn't right. So we see it a lot with anorexic clients, right? An anorexic client, we see what they look like. They can technically see what they look like, but when they look in the mirror, their brain messes it all up and gives them information that is incorrect about their body. Now, I know it's kind of morphed into I don't like my body. I get that. And again, this is another area where I would have a lot of therapists kind of tell me that I'm wrong, and I don't know, maybe I am, but I don't think I am. Body dysmorphia is a very specific issue, and it often has to do with eating disorders. I'm saying always, but it's what I'm seeing, my brain's messing up, and I can't accept what I actually look like, and I am seeing a fat person when I'm 80 pounds. And it doesn't always have to go that way. It can be other things as well. Okay? Now, what I heard you kind of describing is there's influences socially to not show off womanly bodies. And so this group of kids are wearing a sweatshirt and they're calling it body dysmorphia and almost have this pride kind of connection of I've got body dysmorphia, and they're not using the word correctly. So you're talking about dysphoria, okay?
Dysphoria.
Yeah, and so that's fine. Look, my point on this one is there's going to be a lot of right now, and for the last however many years, there's a lot of misunderstanding and use of mental health words that are incorrect. I think what's important to focus on is, hey, she's wearing sweatshirts and we have an issue with it. We want her to be proud of her body and that she's a woman, and that's not happening. See, that's a different conversation. If you start focusing on the debate of the words, you guys are going to like drive yourselves nuts, you're going to drive your therapist nuts, and you're going to drive your kids nuts. Address the actual issue. I'm concerned because you're wearing sweatshirts and really baggy things when it's hot. And I understand why you're doing it. Is there another way to go about this? Right? Now, you might not resolve it, but you've planted a seed and you've addressed it concretely, and you've addressed it in a way that's going to be safer to talk about. Make sense? When you get into this discussion with your child, they're wearing sweats because they feel more comfortable. And you're going, how could you be comfortable because it's hot? And then you're going, well, I want you to be comfortable, not act comfortable. Right? It gets, anytime you have a complicated conversation, stop everything because you're not going to go anywhere with that conversation. Okay? That's a good time to just listen. And here's my only response. If I've got a child trying to explain to me why they're wearing sweatpants on a 100-degree day, and I know that they're having these issues of gender and everything else, when they tell me, I'm going to keep wearing these sweatshirts because I feel more comfortable, I'm just going to go, man, that must be really difficult for you. That has got to be hard to feel like you've got to wear sweats on a 100-degree day to feel comfortable. Can you tell me more about that? That's it. What I'm never going to say during that conversation is, oh, hey, that's awesome. I'm glad you're doing it. I'm not going to join with them, but I'm also not going to debate them in that moment, because in that moment, they don't want to hear from me. They want to tell me what's going on. And I'm going to be honest. I'm always going to be curious. So I really want to know what's going on before I respond. Now, I'm not saying that down the road I might not have certain conversations. I'm not saying that I might not be concerned. I'm not even saying that it's healthy that they're doing it. But here's the problem, you guys. You parents aren't usually the ones who are going to help them resolve and get reasonable about some of these issues. You can plant some seeds, but it's going to be like a friend or a teacher or a coach or somebody, right? It's going to be just them growing up, and to join things that you don't believe in. You can give your opinion, but you don't have to have the debates, and you don't want to spend all this time trying to convince them, because most of your children aren't convincible. Make sense? And remember, we're playing the long game. I always tell parents, hey, no matter what your kids do when they're teens, if you're the happiest, most successful people they know, I don't mean the richest, I just mean the happiest, most successful people they know, they're going to gravitate back to doing life the way that you're doing life. If everything about your relationship was miserable and you were the most miserable people they know, they're not going to gravitate back to your morals and your values in the way that you do life. They're going to constantly seek it elsewhere, a model elsewhere. Okay? I appreciate that. And I love his reminder. This bag of vaping contraband that he was supposed to throw away several years ago wasn't important today. And that crisis was everything back then. And look, I'm not saying that influencing and trying to help your child get off drugs or get off vaping, or, I'm not saying that's not important and not to be addressed. That's not what I'm saying. But you see, I'm saying that the relationship in the hierarchy needs to be the top. Right? So it's not that we don't try and to get them to stop the bad behavior. It's that we don't try and get them to stop the bad behavior at the expense of the relationship, to the point that you're not getting them to stop and you're damaging the relationship. I think sometimes people misunderstand me and they think that I'm saying don't address things. I'm not saying don't address things. What I'm saying is stop when what you're doing is not working, and on top of it, it's damaging the relationship. What I'm saying is sometimes you will not be successful in parenting your child. You will not successfully get them off drugs, or you won't successfully get them to stop smoking weed or vaping, or you won't successfully get them to stop a friendship with somebody who's a negative influence, or you won't successfully get them to do their homework and they're going to get kicked out of school. What I'm saying is when they suffer the consequences of their bad behavior and you couldn't get the parenting thing to work, when nothing you did worked, I'm saying don't sacrifice the relationship just because you feel like you failed. Sometimes you got to let it go. They're making mistakes, they're continuing to make mistakes, and they're not going to change anytime soon. And then what I'll watch parents do is when they don't have control, they can't change anything, they give up the relationship because I've heard this time and time again. Parents often feel like they're condoning bad behavior if they have a happy, fun time with their child who's doing really wrong things. And I get that sentiment, right? But look, it's not that you're condoning anything. It's just that you can't control it, and this is your child. You've got to still maintain the relationship. I can't tell you how often I've had this conversation with parents. Hey, I want you to stop talking about their grades and talking about the fact that they're smoking weed, and I want you to talk about your job, or I want you to talk about something funny, or like watch cat videos on YouTube, or just do anything except that. Talk about anything other than the tough stuff. And the response of the parents is, how can I do that and be a good parent? How can I have a fun conversation with my child when all I can think about is the bad things that they're doing? And I get that sentiment, but you see, you guys are older. You guys are the one, you're on your journey, they're on their journey. And I hope you influence their journey, but don't forget, you can't influence somebody that you're not in a relationship with. And so that's what he's remembering, is there was a time that this vape equipment was so important that it was more important than the relationship, and over time he put the relationship first so many times that he has a healthy relationship with his child. That vape incident doesn't even seem important. He can't even remember the facts of the vape incident. That's how unimportant some of your crises are. Is a few years later, you're probably not going to remember everything. And then the other thing I want you to remember is if you miss a parenting opportunity, you're not going to ruin your child. But one hurtful word can ruin your child. You're not all knowing. You're not all in control of them. You don't get to be. And so when you go out trying to change them, you're assuming that you're going to be able to make a change. And that's why I use the word influence. Influence, optimize your 11% influence over them. Okay? Remember, their journey is not your journey. You don't have to be miserable just because they're miserable. And now that brings me to that hierarchy I was talking about. That's why the hierarchy is God, self, marriage, and then parenting. In terms of your time, your effort, your energy, your focus, especially by the time they're a teen. I know that it's a little bit different when they're like my daughter's age too. I get that. Okay, but as they get older, the time, the effort, the energy, your control changes drastically. Okay? You guys, my hope and my goal for you, no matter how bad the crisis is that you can come out of it having maintained your relationship and having found a way to be okay yourself, even if your child's totally not okay. Because that's their part of the journey. I know that you're going to be affected by their crisis, but my hope and my prayer for you is that you can separate enough that you can kind of live your own life alongside them rather than living their life. Which means you're sad as you are dealing with what they're going through, but you still have a social life. You can still make it to work. You still get out of bed. And every thought of every day isn't about this crisis that's going on in their lives. Now, if I had ever seen that it was healthy and good and effective to live their life for them, obsess on their crisis, and spend all of your time, your effort, and energy and money on fixing them, I would be preaching the heck out of doing that. The problem is most of you have tried that way. It didn't work. And on top of it, the relationship didn't get better. Your marriage didn't get better. And you're miserable. So my unfair advantage as I'm teaching this is you're here because the other stuff didn't work. And I want you to know you're not alone, because that other stuff doesn't work for most parents. It's very few parents who have that super compliant child where you really didn't have to parent them, like they were going to be okay anyways. You just kind of needed to send them off in the right direction every now and again. Okay, so you're not alone. You're not bad parents. You're awesome parents. And tonight, I hope that you remember, you're on your journey. Who am I and how do I want to behave no matter what's going on with my child? Not, how can I make sure that I change my child and make them a perfect image of me?